All right, guys, we're going to try to be as efficient as possible. I know I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you here in terms of the causes of the Civil War. Um, Everything we need from our Google Drive that I showed you in class is also linked on the opening page of this presentation. You've got the way that you're supposed to be taking notes right now lined out for you here, okay? As you come across this menu of events, as it were, okay? You're listing them in chronological order. So that's your order, okay? You're going to give me the event and the year, so on and so on, okay? Um, Again, that's all listed right here and also corresponds to chapter 13 in your AMSCO if you are a go getter, okay? We are going to begin our notes with the notion that everything we're talking about can be attributed to the rise of sectionalism in America, okay? And the understanding, right, that all politics are local. When we look at time period 4, the tail end, what single event radically impacts westward migration? And you should be thinking about, right, when we're talking about Manifest Destiny, the gold rush, okay? And we are now going to populate the West. So the sections in America now are the North, the South, and the West. And as I've said, the West is largely going to be a fight over, who they're aligned with, the North and the South, or the South, excuse me. And when we look at sectionalism, okay, just like we talk about nationalism and intense sense of patriotism and pride in one's nation, sectionalism is that for one's region, right? The South, oftentimes New England in particular, when you're talking about the North, we know this to be the case today. People take pride in who they are. Now, this is different, right? Because it's greatly on the increase and very divisive, clearly, as the United States approaches the Civil War, which we know to be based on slavery. Um, when Polk becomes president, he tries to be one who transcends this kind of sectional divisionism, but it can't be had. And it's all about slavery. It's going to be, as I've said many times, now this is the single issue that we're talking about, right? In the bill, slavery is the cause of civil war. What we're looking at is like what the road, looks like on the way there. Um, so early on, one of the proposals, it does not pass. Okay, is the Wilmot Proviso. Uh, Wilmot, I believe, is a senator or a congressman from Pennsylvania. And he proposes that, hey, everything out west, there's going to be no slavery. Okay. Clearly, it doesn't pass. Slavery is going to remain an unresolved issue when Polk leaves office in 1849. Um, and we know that right about that time, right? 1848 was a Mexican American War. We have the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and so on. And so that Mexican cession is a large piece of land, as we know, right? California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona. What's going to happen to slavery in this massive piece of real estate? And again, in the wake of the California gold rush, what about if California becomes a state? What's going to happen? All right. What about Mexico or Texas, as it were, right? And I want you to think, what would the Whigs think about it? All right. What would the Democrats think about it? Uh, Zachary Taylor, who we saw rise to fame in the Mexican American War, right, believes that the issue of slavery can just be resolved by statehood. As long as, the Western territories remained territories, the federal government has to deal with this sticky wicket. And so his solution is to pretty much just pass it along to the states, let them decide if they will be, uh, slave states or not. And this concept, by the way, we're going to know as just for the terms of, popular sovereignty, okay, which we know is the power of the people. But with respect to the debate on slavery, if we leave it to the states, we're leaving it to popular sovereignty. The North clearly wants to stop the spread of slavery into the new territories. Some, yes, want abolition. We'll talk about kind of different motives for why and so on. And the South wants to retain their political power. They fear that new states that aren't slave states are going to marginalize them. And in 1849, there are 15 free states and 15 slave states. But we're coming up on the notion of California coming in to the Union. We know that their population expanded something like, I don't know, it was like 15,000 to 225,000 over the course of like 3.5 years between 1848 and late 1851. So California is ready to come in as a state. They want to come in as a free state. And of course, the fear of marginalization, the South and objects to that, okay? Northerners draft petitions demanding the prohibition of slavery. And even now, moderate Southerners are talking about the notion of secession. So I think what we see here is quickly, right, with the Mexican cession and the notion of California entering as a state, the divisions over this issue have been very much drawn and are very much intense. And this is all going to bring us to the Compromise of 1850, which is going to bring California into the Union. And once again, we get a little Henry Clay, the great compromiser. This is the same, Henry Clay's American System, and Henry Clay had talked John Calhoun down from the nullification crisis and so on and so forth. And so he devises the Compromise of 1850, which allows California in as a free state. Territorial governments will, until territories become states, will have no restrictions on slavery. You would eliminate the slave trade in Washington, D.C., but not slavery itself, and you would put in place, to appease the South, a more effective fugitive slave law requiring by law Northerners, as it were, to return captured runaway slaves. A controversial piece, but this is what it takes to, ultimately, I would think, to just kind of kick the can down the road, quite frankly. The debate over the compromise is significant in the Senate. And early on, we see it's led by kind of the old school guys, Henry Clay, there's Calhoun again, Webster, with this idea of compromise. The second phase is a group of people that we're going to get into now, like Stephen Douglas, like Jefferson Davis, for whom compromise is less important than achieving their personal, or for that matter, right, their sectional objectives. And when compromise seems impossible, it seems that the tensions are already in 1850 are incredibly high. Nevertheless, we press forward. We have two territories in Utah and New Mexico. Never mind the unorganized territory and the Oregon country secured, from Great Britain, where there's kind of no restrictions on slavery, and California is in as a free state. And again, some controversial portions of the Compromise of 1850 back east in terms of the fugitive slave law and such. By the way, this is a little pay homage to Henry Clay. This is the last we're going to talk of him. This is the kind of last major role he plays as the great compromiser. is the Compromise of 1850. But we've been talking about Henry Clay, yes, a twice failed presidential candidate for the entirety of time period 4 as a major political figure. Understand that, or in terms of this divisiveness, this sectionalism, is coming at the time when we are well into, right, at least the early phase of the Industrial Revolution. And we talked about what that means in terms of trade and transportation and communication. And we talked about railroads quite a bit. And we talked about this fact, but it's bearing itself out on this map a little bit. Clearly, I can't hear you, but you should be saying to yourself, all the railroads, or not all, but the vast majority, right? About 3/4 of them are laid up north. And that's going to be really, really important. And this is where I think I've hinted to you that you could kind of make the argument that the Civil War was fought over railroads, or to be more precise, perhaps a single railroad stop. And this is the story over the next several minutes here. Okay. So we know that white settlement, right, is now well across the Mississippi River, pushing into the Great Plains. And we are manifesting that destiny. We have canals and railroads, and there's new need for transportation and communication and great support of it, right? Because of this manifest destiny concept. And so we get into building the Transcontinental Railroad. We know that the western terminus is going to be out in California. But what is the eastern terminus? And by eastern, we mean kind of mid-eastern, because as you saw on the previous map, we already have the tracks laid out in, the east to the Midwest. So should the eastern terminus be a city like Chicago? Or should it be down south, New Orleans, St. Louis, Memphis? Of course, Northerners favor Chicago and Southerners favor other cities, right? But now think about this is not just a railroad stop, okay? The eastern terminus of the Transcontinental Railroad will be a major center of commerce, will necessarily give life to a major city around it. This is massive economic development. So this is really important, all right, to both sections, the North and the South. And so the railroad becomes a really significant piece of this struggle, which becomes further inflamed after the Gadsden Purchase, which is an 1853 treaty where U.S. goes back to Mexico and say, hey, remember all that Mexican cession? We need more. We need actually a southern strip of land in now Arizona and New Mexico to build the Transcontinental Railroad because it's too rocky to the north there. And so here is the notion, right, of the Gadsden Purchase. So the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, right, gives us all of this Mexican cession following, of course, the annexation of Texas. And then this additional piece of land is asked for by the South. That's the Gadsden Purchase. I would actually ask you to pause for a minute and watch a really important video on the Gadsden Purchase, and then come back to this video, please. Like I said, very important video. Okay, so now we know, right? But the South has positioned themselves for their southern transcontinental railroad. Okay. The North is trying to position themselves for their northern transcontinental railroad. And this is going to bring us to the much less funny Kansas-Nebraska controversy. Okay. So Stephen Douglas is a major player in politics. He's a senator from Illinois. And he wants the railroad to go through Chicago. Now, listen, I want you to understand, I've already laid out the expectation, right, that a railroad is going to give birth to or be a part of it, massive economic development, okay? So, senators, right, part of their job is to bring that project's money home, like what they would call the more often they would call it kind of pork barrel spending, right? The ability to get federal money to your state, like that's a if a senator can do that, that's a pretty good attribute, right, politically for that senator. And Stephen Douglas is trying to get this done, and he knows how to work the Senate. So in 1854 he introduces a bill to essentially organize a territory known as Nebraska so that the railroad can run through that. Okay, so we need the land to do this, i.e., Gadsden Purchase. Stephen Douglas is politically wise enough to know that the South is going to oppose this because it's giving the railroad up north, like the writings on the wall. Hey, we're going to get this territory. They are wise enough to see that why this would be, right? So he includes in there a provision to let that new territory, Nebraska, decide for itself, popular sovereignty, whether or not they would have slavery, even though that territory is north of the previous 3630 line in the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Okay. Now, the South is listening, but they actually know that they're probably in a pretty powerful position. They need to be won over. So they actually ask not for just one, but for two territories to be open to popular sovereignty. Create both of these territories for the railroad to run through and leave them both open to popular sovereignty. It's debated greatly, as all of these things are, but it passes in 1854. And so now this effectively repeals the Missouri Compromise. There is no longer a line that divides who will be free and who will be a slave state or territory. This is huge, okay? It actually divides the Whig Party. The Northern Democrats, okay, who had been kind of holding on as Democrats, even though they're on the minority side by far on the single most important issue of politics in the day, they're going to leave now, and they're actually going to create the Republican Party. And many, again, fractures of the Whigs. Remember, that was a little bit of a tenuous fracture, right, between the strain of Federalists and also the anti-Jackson Democrats. So they come to an end at this point, okay? At which, if we were to go back to the political parties, we get into the second or the third political party system here, right? So this is when we get the creation of the anti-slavery Republican Party. And we get to the story of Bleeding Kansas, okay? So understand, now we have two territories that are open for popular sovereignty, okay? And they're open to be populated in the first place. So white settlers began moving into the territories. They're coming from the American North. They're coming from the American South, and elections are held. And the issue of slavery will ultimately be resolved in these two territories. Now, in Kansas, remember, in the South wanted Kansas because they thought that was more likely even than Nebraska. They thought they could get two, but they knew they could get Kansas, or they thought they knew they could get Kansas. There's about 1,500 voters that move into Kansas at the time. There are over 6,000 votes in the election. Ladies and gentlemen, we actually have legit election fraud in Kansas in 1855. What happened was a lot of what they call ruffians from Missouri, a slave state, clearly, Missouri Compromise, had rushed into the territory to vote in the elections and then kind of went back home. They established a pro-slavery government in Kansas and went back home to Missouri. Enter John Brown. John Brown is a notable, about to become much more notable abolitionist. And he leads a movement that's going to kick off a series of events to be known as Bleeding Kansas. He actually organizes with some of his fellow abolitionists, including his sons, and they murder and mutilate 5 pro-slavery settlers for being pro-slavery and for bringing that slavery to Kansas, which in his opinion could have and should have been free, especially were it not for election fraud. This is known as the Potawatomi Massacre, and it kicks off, like I said, a series of events back and forth. This guerrilla, take a look at that spelling there, right? Guerrilla warfare between each side. We have like battling terrorist organizations of both slavery and anti-slavery forces, like mobs in the street kind of thing. And they both use this event or this series of events to show how bad that the other side is. And again, so the divisiveness is really, really on the rise. I think there's a video here that's probably worth your while, just a couple minutes on the Kansas-Nebraska Act, as well as Bleeding Kansas. So if you would please pause me and click on this link through your presentation to watch this video now. All right. So, good stuff there. I think you trace that back, right? Bleeding Kansas to the Kansas-Nebraska Act to Stephen Douglas's wanting to have a train stop in Chicago. Maybe I've gone too far, a single railroad stop, right? But in my opinion now, we are really seeing the ball rolling, right? Once we're having like blood being shed in the streets, we are at a dangerous spot here, at least, right? We're at a dangerous spot. So that was my question, at least, right? Did pork barrel spending on a railroad stop cause the Civil War? Let's pause for a moment to talk about the ideological differences, right? Because we're watching this kind of play out politically and what's happening in the Senate and the territories and states. But turning our attention to where kind of the people are and the culture. And mind you, no, we can't speak in absolutes about all the people. But we can kind of try to understand the big picture. And first of all, if I ask you, what's the single, what's the most, the answer to every question ever asked, money. So we want to start there. Okay. Do all Northerners oppose slavery? No, we know that's not going to be the case. Okay. And all Southerners do not support slavery. Okay, and we talk about, especially in certain pockets in Appalachia, what might have most Northerners opposed regarding slavery? Pocket that one. See if we can answer that one going through these notes. Why might they have opposed abolishing slavery? And we need to think about that. Okay. What would happen to the price of cotton if slavery were abolished? That should strike you with the common sense answer right there, right? And who would have opposed that? All right. So I want you to think about who would be impacted by abolition, by the perpetuation of slavery. Okay. But what would happen to the labor pool? What would happen to wages, the competition for wages? Okay. So in the North, there was a concept of free soil. Now, abolitionists, of course, were anti slavery. They wanted abolition. Free soilers just wanted no expansion of slavery into the territories. Some free soilers might have had the same moral objection to slavery as abolitionists, but maybe had a more practical attitude. They are kind of loosely aligned movements, at least against the whole sale expansion of slavery. What they really feared, though, if you're a free soiler, that is, if slavery expands west, that white Americans would lose the opportunity to get good jobs out west. That labor work would go to the slave pool and would eliminate opportunities for white settlers. And especially now, right? The Irish, the Germans, the longtime settlers that had been there and want to move west. So most Northerners absolutely oppose the spread of slavery. They fear economic competition, however, if slaves are freed, right? If you just free this massive pool of labor in the South and let them come up north and let them go out west, well, that's competition for them too. So free soilers would have been A-okay with just kind of restricting slavery, right? And by the by, that's not a bad practice for the economics of King Cotton, is it not? Right? To keep the price of cotton down because the price of labor is down. It becomes interesting, too, when you step out of economic arguments and look at the argument in favor of slavery put up as kind of an intellectual defense. And I kind of hinted at this a couple classes ago, but we should have the notion by now that living as especially a recent immigrant in an American city, working in a factory up north, is a fairly miserable life, right? The work conditions are long hours, low pay, unsafe, unsanitary, dangerous conditions. The cities are trash, rats, sewage, disease in the streets. There's no real, there's no, the cities have just popped up too much. There's no sanitation departments or any of that yet, right? And so it's a miserable life. And those in the South would front that as evidence for, hey, slavery isn't all that bad, right? It's actually a good thing because the slaves actually have better conditions than you have up north. And you know what? The fact of the matter is there's no way that the two races can get along with one another. And this way we can live in peace. And it's also good for the country because look at King Cotton, right? Where cotton is half of our exports. And we can do that because the cost of production is low because of the institution of slavery. All right. And look at your dirty, nasty cities up north. So I think this also hints at, very much kind of a cultural difference in how the North and South just generally look at each other. It's with this backdrop that the political parties will reform into the, I guess the third political party system, right? And we talked about this a little bit ago, and we saw this coming with a video we watched a week or so ago. The Republican Party forms, as I said, from that loose coalition that well, it's not the loose coalition, but it wasn't built to last coalition of the Whig Party. And they fracture predictably over the issue of slavery. Um, the Know Nothing Party, the Nativist Party, right? The Free Soilers we just talked about. And then you have like those ex-Whigs. You have the anti-slavery Democrats up north. You have the Free Soilers joining in, and this is the creation of the Republican Party in 1852 or 54, excuse me. So it's still going to be that strain of the Federalist Party, okay, would include, therefore, a lot of like the JQA, it would include a lot of the Whigs, would probably bring back certainly some of the anti-Jackson folks, certainly the Free Soilers, certainly the abolitionists, and all together, they will become the party of abolition and the party of Lincoln. Okay, we're not there yet. We're a couple years away from seeing Lincoln on the rise politically, but we've got to get through first the election of James Buchanan, who will probably go down as one of the worst presidents in American history. He was very timid and indecisive at a time when our nation needed decisive leadership for sure. Okay. And so that then will set the table for us to get up towards Abraham Lincoln. So we've really kind of covered. Didn't you like the extent of coverage I just gave James Buchanan, by the way? And we're going to enter Abraham Lincoln here in a moment. Okay. Want to talk about another kind of major issue first, setting up the table for exactly how divisive Lincoln's election will be in the first place. And that's actually going to be the story of Dred Scott and the story of the Supreme Court getting involved here. Okay, so Dred Scott was a slave, and he was taken into Wisconsin, which was a free territory. And there he sued for his freedom, saying, I can't be a slave in a free land. Now, that case makes it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules against Scott. Now, this is a really notable issue. There's a couple things they say. A, you can't even be suing us because you're not a citizen because you're black. You don't have citizenship. B, your property. And the Fifth Amendment, okay, states that Congress can't take somebody's property without due process. Okay. Again, the centerpiece of that ruling is telling Dred Scott that you are no more than property. Also, that Congress has no authority to deprive persons of their slave property anywhere, whether a state was free or slave. So, in essence, states can feel free to prohibit slavery, but the federal government has no authority on the issue whatsoever. Let me say that louder for the people in the back. The Supreme Court's ruling in Dred Scott is that slavery is none of our business. It's a really super puzzling ruling given all of the public policy implications and the fact that it's the single most divisive issue in the nation. But when we talk about, kicking the can down the road, Dred Scott certainly does that in that it provides no closure. But it does worse than that in essentially affirming the very notion by law of white supremacy in that, blacks can't be citizens. And this is coming from the Supreme Court, which is really significant, right? and viewing them as property, and ultimately saying again that we have no say in the matter whatsoever. So I'm going to ask you guys to pause again and watch another video here on the Dred Scott decision, and then come back to me because I think this thing is also a really significant story. Okay. Okay. So the court ruling results in, again, I say on the slide here, an immediate explosion of the sectional debate, but that ship has sailed, right? It's just like another flare up. Okay. Southerners love it. They think that this, and it does, in their eyes, this opens up the entire West, the entire North for that matter, anywhere to the question of slavery. And Northerners are stunned and, let's say, none too pleased. Buchanan, who knows what he's doing? He kind of endorses the decision, but he's trying to, take care of this Kansas issue all at the same time. He virtually goes nowhere. Okay. But here we are, moving along our list. Let's see what we talked about. We talked Bleeding Kansas, Compromise of 1850, Dred Scott. Haven't gotten there yet. We talked Gadsden's Purchase. We haven't gotten there yet. We talked Kansas, Nebraska. We're about to go here, I think, next. We'll talk about this. Yes, no, yes. Okay, and I don't think oh yeah, for Wilmot Proviso. We did that right away. Of course we did. That was the one that said we would never have slavery out west. Clearly doesn't pass. In terms of kind of saying on where I was about like the culture thing, we can really see a fascinating story how divided the nation is right now when you look at the story of Charles Sumner and Andrew Butler and Preston Brooks. So Charles Sumner is giving a speech on the Senate floor attacking slavery, and goes off a little bit, a little ad hominem attacks on Andrew Butler, a Democrat senator from South Carolina. Butler's got a nephew, this dude Preston Brooks from South Carolina, who's in the House of Representatives, and he is none too pleased. And he ends up attacking Charles Sumner on the floor of the Senate, beating him literally within inches of his life with a cane on the floor of the U.S. Senate. And by the way, goes home a hero. Like, the people of South Carolina love him. Charles Sumner can't work like ever again. He's like damaged goods. But he becomes like a martyr hero. And you want to talk about sectionalism. The South loves Preston Brooks for beating a U.S. senator to near death on the floor of the Senate. So we oftentimes see some pretty divisive politics in America. And we can talk about what we see today. But we ain't seen this just yet, okay? All right, so we are set up, though, sadly for Lincoln, who's going to be a great president probably no matter what. He is the man for the conditions that we're getting into, okay? And we're going to talk about the rise of Lincoln with the zeitgeist of, Charles Sumner and Preston Brooks in the background, right? So recall where we are in the Midwest, right? Kansas, Nebraska, Dred Scott's out there, Wisconsin, okay? And getting into Kansas again, the capital of the Kansas Territory at the time is a little town actually by the name of Lecompton, and there's a pro-slavery government in Kansas because, well, remember that's why John Brown went off on the Potawatomi massacre is because it was established by voter fraud. So there's a pro-slavery government in Kansas. They write a constitution that, of course, protects slavery. But the Free Soilers actually outnumber the slave supporters. The actual people who live in Kansas are in favor of freedom. And they vote it down. They vote down that state constitution, okay, or I guess territory constitution at the time, as they're applying for statehood, as it were, okay. James Buchanan, okay, still in office, he endorses the Lecompton Constitution. And this really sets off Stephen Douglas. Remember, Stephen Douglas is that senator from Illinois who wanted the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Now, here's the deal. Douglas wasn't a pro-slavery guy. Douglas wanted his railroad, you understand? So he was politically making that concession to open up Kansas and Nebraska to popular sovereignty. He wanted the people to decide, right? And if they had voted for slavery, well, Buchanan wasn't anti-slavery. Don't get that twisted. Or Douglas wasn't anti-slavery, right? He just wanted popular sovereignty. Well, the people in Kansas have voted to be a free state. And Buchanan, the president, says, no, let's endorse this state constitution that goes against the will of the people, in Douglas's opinion. And he's kind of right? So Douglas convinces Congress, because remember, Douglas is a good politician, convinces Congress to authorize another referendum. And again, it's voted down. So Northern Democrats now see Stephen Douglas as a hero, where previously they felt betrayed by him. And the Southern Democrats, who thought that he was a hero, now see him as a traitor. All along, Douglas would tell you, I'm just in favor of popular sovereignty. I think really what he's in favor of is that cash money. That's probably, all about that railroad stop. But Kansas is admitted as a free state in 1861. Rock, chalk, Jayhawk. All right. So all of this is going on while that young congressman who had asked for those spot resolutions of James Polk, in the Mexican-American War send-off there. Abraham Lincoln is a congressman from Illinois, and he's running for Senate now, and he's running against Stephen Douglas. So Lincoln is a Republican. He was a former Whig. He went to the Republican Party. Douglas, we know, is the Democrat who's all about popular sovereignty, right? They have a series of debates in their campaign. And they're famous. It puts Lincoln on the map. Now, Lincoln loses the election, okay? But he really steps onto the scene as like this massive political figure. So the congressional elections of 1858 are really notable in that nationwide, despite losing the election, Lincoln has made his name for himself as tremendously bright, articulate, reasonable, significant player on the scene. And I got another little video for you here on the Lincoln-Douglas debate. So coffee time for me. Pause me, watch this video, come back here in a minute. Okay. So Lincoln's on the rise. The country is quite literally falling apart. Violence is continuing, and we get ourselves some John Brown again, because where there is violence, there is John Brown. And John Brown is involved in another fascinating story here. This is the story of Harper's Ferry in 1859. Okay. Now, as you're filling out your notes, right, and we're going through this chronologically, you've got to be able to view Harper's Ferry in light of all of these other things that have led to it. Okay, um, and so John Brown uh, gets together with a bunch of men, his sons again. Uh, they've raised money for their abolitionist movement, and they've gone back east. They've gone into Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Now, some of you may have been by Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry, Virginia is actually right about where Virginia meets Maryland, meets West Virginia, meets Pennsylvania. It's like out in that area, right? Um, and they go to seize this federal arsenal. Arsenal is where the government, right, keeps armaments, guns and cannons and so on. And he wants to steal all their arms and then go out to the local farms and lead a slave uprising, arming the slaves and then letting them go with him and go kill the masters and just terrorize down through the South. The army arrives real quickly. Local militia join them. They have a standoff in the arsenal, a shootout essentially. Several of John Brown's men are killed, and John Brown eventually surrenders. He is convicted of treason, I think, and he is hanged and executed. But it's an incredible story. John Brown is certainly one that doesn't mess around. But there's a little backfire effect here, and it's kind of similar, right? I think we can make a comparison between Harper's Ferry and like Nat Turner's Slave Rebellion, right? Both, like Nat Turner's Slave Rebellion, the net effect was a lot of Southerners, especially in South Carolina, like the Stono Rebellion, were like, okay, well, it's time to like clamp down control. And in light of Harper's Ferry, Southerners use this as evidence to see, look, abolitionists, the North is coming for our way of life, and they're willing to use violence to come get it. And they actually think that the Republican Party secretly financed Harper's Ferry. Okay. And so this is really like evidence to them that we should, in fact, secede from the Union. So predictably, another video from me while you pause me on Harper's Ferry, because this is also something that's pretty significant and worth our while. So cheers. All right, guys, we are now like off to the Civil War, just about, right? Harper's Ferry is 1859. And that's in the light up of the election of 1860. So there is no other issue than slavery, all right, in the election of 1860. And that's when the Democratic Party is being ripped into two, okay? Now, the anti-slavery Democrats probably would have left already to join the Republicans. Other moderates in the Democratic Party would have been like free soilers, popular sovereignty folks. So they might support Stephen Douglas. Pro-slavery Southerners want John Breckinridge. So you see there's kind of this fracturing, right, of the Democratic Party, whereas the Republican Party has coalesced they've reformed as kind of the anti-slavery party. And they nominate Abraham Lincoln. And we'll talk about, is Abraham Lincoln anti-slavery or pro-union? He's kind of, really, the truth is he is both. There's another third party candidate that may cut into both parties' votes. The long and the short of it is that Lincoln wins clearly, but he only has actually 39% of the vote. So fractured is this election. But The electoral college is segmented such in his favor that he actually does win the electoral votes. So we don't have any of that, thank God, in this election going back to the House and all that stuff, because that would have been perhaps more messy than any of the other previous times when that's happened. Um, so Lincoln wins. The South sees the writing on the wall, and they immediately demand an end to the Union. South Carolina, because it's always South Carolina, calls up a special convention to discuss secession. And in fact, they do secede in 1860. Um, that is, if you look at December 20th, right? We have elections in like November, president takes place. So that's before Lincoln even takes office. Okay. 6 other states join uh, South Carolina in that time. I probably should have listed them the same way they are on this map, but look, here is your, by the time Lincoln takes office, mind you, here's your map in order of seceding states: South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, Tennessee. Um, North Carolina and Tennessee, as we'll talk about, just ultimately felt like they just couldn't fight against the South. Um, the Confederate States of America, or the CSA, elects Jefferson Davis as their president. The initial capital is in Montgomery, Alabama. But with that, we have a whole new country, the Confederated States of America. The problem is the United States of America is not just going to recognize the Confederate States of America. Okay, bye-bye. We saw like that's not what Britain was going to do to the colonies. Fort Sumter becomes the first kind of boiling point in the Civil War. It is a island in the Charleston Harbor. I'm sure some of you have probably been there. I know people go down to Charleston and such for a vacation around here, right? And so the South can't take it. They're not equipped. And remember, that's kind of going to be a theme. That's a major reason. Spoiler alert: the North is going to win this thing, right? Is because they have more, industry, trade, equipment, so on and so forth. But the South asks for it. Buchanan and then Lincoln, when he takes office after Buchanan's lame duck period, predictably refused to give Fort Sumter to the South. Lincoln actually sends a resupply ship to the fort, and the South decides to attack it. I think Lincoln was probably trying to see, he wasn't going to hold off resupplying his fort, was he? And the South says, this is our moment. They go for it. And after a 2-day bombardment, and my pictures are cutting off here, the fort falls, and the war goes on. And the Fort Sumter battle will mark the official beginning of the Civil War. As I just suggested, the North will have incredible built-in advantages. The South has some advantages as well. They're going to fight largely on their home turf. They're going to fight a defensive war. They've got great generals. They've got emotion behind their cause. But Lincoln's got the power of the federal government. He calls and gets 75,000 volunteers right off the bat. That's going to be the final straw that actually does provoke the other states, because now when war is really kind of happening here, states like Tennessee and North Carolina have to take a side one way or another. But the point is, we are off and running with the U.S. Civil War. So that's kind of where we are for our notes today. We have gotten into the causes of the Civil War. And I don't want to lead you too much, as I say on the slide here. Um, but in my opinion, if I were to do this assignment, I think I would go with some of the events highlighted here. Um, you can always make an argument. I'm not saying I am right for any of these other ones. I could easily hear an argument on any of these. But that's what we want to get into is, kind of processing and owning this and making some argumentation. And so that's going to be really kind of the nature of the product that we are working on with the notes that you took today. I appreciate you taking those notes, guys. You can get into the folder linked here. And I'll look forward to seeing you for a brief class on Wednesday. Thanks, guys. Take care.